Well, while Peter's grabbing a couple last-minute things, let me kind of get into my spiel since we are running a bit late this morning. And that is welcome to the Genus live stream. This is a live stream we try to do every Sunday morning at 8:45 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Nailed that one. And so, yeah, generally how the outline works is we will go into some talking about Genus news, some updates around the business here, around the shop. And then we will go into a beer of the week where we do a beer judging certification breakdown of sort of random styles out of the book for you all. And then we'll go into some discussion topics that we kind of go into some specific topics, explain some fun beer stuff to you guys, and then open up for general questioning at the end. So, and there he is with tea. No tea. I really need tea.
I didn't find any tea. There wasn't any in the back, and then I couldn't. I had to figure out a new setup for a computer since someone stole my normal go-to iPad. Huh?
Just do it on your phone.
Huh?
Okay.
Anyway, I got this. This can work.
All right,
I'll be fine.
Well, let's get into it now that Peter is here.
Let's just jump into it, guys. Sorry for the delay on all this.
That is Genus news. So first of all, we got our Willet beer, our 5th Willet beer out.
Which, by the way, if you guys have not seen our 5th Willet beer, please go ahead and jump on that. Give it a view. Give it a like. All the good things that go along with that, because it's taking off slower than we wanted to. And if you guys want to see more Willet beer challenges, then we kind of need those things to get the views up, because it takes a lot of production time. So when you do something like the How to NEPA, which is a one-day project and all of maybe 3 or 4 hours of work, versus a Willet beer, which is 20 plus hours worth of work, we really want those 20 plus hours to show. So if you haven't watched Willet beer number 5, go watch it right now or after the live stream.
Also, we got a new fermenter in. We have a little 2-barrel fermenter from, actually, that's the More Beer Pro, right?
Yeah, More Beer Pro line, which I'm really excited. We will be doing a review on that and showing you guys off what the More Beer Pro line has to offer. They're really, really reasonably priced, and so we haven't really dug into what all they do, but they seem like quality tanks for a fraction of the price that you can get.
Yeah, it seemed all right.
Line, so.
Giving it a once-over yesterday.
Yeah.
Would have liked to do that review yesterday, but had to do lots of cleaning in the brew house. Instead, kind of par for the course. Also brewed up a big stout that is actually currently making a mess right now, because while I thought it was done blowing off yesterday, I was wrong. And now it is still blowing off all over the top of the fermenter.
Not done blowing yet.
Not done blowing. Blows for days. Anyway, and probably our biggest update for you this week, which is completely out of focus, but right behind us.
Yeah, it's there.
Is if you look at our tap wall, we had, I believe, 12 handles going into this week, and now we have at least the potential to have 25 different taps right now.
So we will be expanding our tap list quite comprehensively now, which is really fun for us, because we can make sure we always have a couple IPAs on, always have a couple sours on, and hopefully just can make a good round range of beers, which is fun for us, especially because we never brew the same beer twice, and so we just get to experiment a lot more and make sure that all those have an outlet for people to taste.
Yeah, so that was fun. Yeah, we got a little bit more organization back there too. Came in on Tuesday night and pulled an all-nighter. Completely cleaned out the walk-in, installed a nice new keg rack so we can have some better organization. And then, yeah, got some holes drilled in the wall, got some shanks installed. So all kinds of fun stuff on that end. Peter's a little bit quiet.
I'm a little bit quiet because I'm still trying to pull up our live stream.
Okay. Peter's trying to pull up a live stream. Peter bought a scooter. That's not news.
I bought a scooter. Hey, there's a live stream.
We did do like a really brief live stream a few days ago with Peter's scooter. He bought an electric scooter, and we tandemed it over to his parents' house, which was death-defying to say the least.
Dumb and Dumber style.
And then
the only way to buy scoots.
Yeah, finally we got some yeast back in for the Castermuncher kits. So those are now back in stock on our website. So if you missed out on sort of the first round of trying to get some of those orders, we do have the yeast back again for it, so those are now available if you wanted to try that out. Otherwise, keep checking in on our website too. I'm hoping to get out a couple more recipe kits on that. Crossing my fingers by the end of this coming week. Yes, that's
yeah. So we're hoping to have at least an IPA and maybe something else going on.
Perfect. Yes. Yeah. Scooting and almost died. That is a fact. I just didn't really look to where we were going. All right, well, that sums up our genus news. Shall we go on to our
Beer of the week. Bum, bum, bum. Beer of the week. Boo.
And that is a Belgian-style IPA.
I'm super excited about this style because it's the style that we put on tap this last week, and it's almost gone, but it tastes delicious. The one that we did is a double or imperial-style Belgian IPA. It is more alcoholic than it is supposed to be, and it came in at 11.2%, but all the big West Coast IPA flavors are there, as well as just this profound, subtle fruitiness that blends into it and makes it taste just phenomenal.
Bam, yeah, so, that is style 21B in the specialty IPA category of the Beer Judging Certification Program Guidelines. They need to just, condense that down. That's yeah.
Can you hand me my phone so I can look it up, too?
You want to just read it? I thought you're the one that made the beer of the week this week.
Yeah, I know. That doesn't mean I have everything memorized. I mean, I know all these from, studying and everything like that, but I don't, have them on the top of my head all the time.
So kind of like the name says, a Belgian-style IPA is an India Pale Ale, but fermented with Belgian yeast. And the overall profile should be a balanced profile of some fruitiness and some spiciness from the Belgian yeast strain. And this is the really key to the style, and that's something that complements the hop additions used in the beer.
The nice thing about the Belgian-style IPA is because you are using a yeast that's naturally more fruity than other yeasts, you can also use hops that aren't necessarily as fruity and get some good kind of roundness with the whole profile.
Exactly. So these beers should be fairly light in color, usually gold. They can be a little bit more ambery, but clarity is usually not necessarily a thing, especially if you are going to biotransformation dry hop.
Foreshadowing.
See how I did that? And so typically these are going to be pretty hazy beers, unless they're sitting for way longer than you want them to before you drink them. Otherwise, aromatics are usually going to be somewhat sweet and fruity, and this is going to be usually a combination of both the yeast strain and the hops. This says aroma is usually going to be tropical, soft, and citrusy. But also some floral and spicy notes are acceptable. That spiciness is usually going to come from the yeast more than the hops, though. And so moderate aromas of things like bananas, things like pears, again coming from the yeast strain that you choose. And
And then a lot of complexity can come from there's a range of things you can do with the hops. They allow both New World and Sazer style, kind of Old World style hops, which is a fun little mix when you know that you can do both styles. And kind of blend some more dynamic flavor ranges there.
Perfect. Yeah, so Sazer hops. So speaking of which, shall we
go on to our malt of the week?
Well, actually, let me hit the stats real fast too,
yeah,
and then we'll go into our malt of the week. So generally 50 to 100 IBUs, 5 to 15 SRM, OG of 1058 to 1080, and an FG of 1.008 to 1016, so really, really wide range of final gravities. I think ours definitely fell on the drier side, and I have a feeling that is the better way to go.
Absolutely, yeah. Anything that is going to end up being too sickly sweet with the fruitiness you get off the Belgian yeast and also the extra fruitiness from the hops, I just think distracts from the overall balance and complexity of the beer, because the alcohol warmth on something like this, when it gets up into the higher range like ours is obviously way over the alcohol percentage that you're going for, but still within style you can go up to 9.5%, and the alcohol warmth on that side of the spectrum is a really complex part of what pushes forward a lot of those fruity flavors.
Exactly. So let's go into our malt of the week, where we're going to get that alcohol from.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, other than using just a nice base malt, what we usually do, we decided that the malt of the week this week is going to be red wheat, which red wheat is a fun malt that I think is a lot of times misinterpreted, which is why we wanted to do this one for the Belgian style IPA, because it's not as widely known of a style. So this might be a good introduction to using something like red wheat.
So red wheat is very similar to white wheat and in its qualities. The biggest difference is going to be the overall protein content of the malt. It's going to have an even higher protein content than white wheat, which obviously will have more than just a barley.
Yeah.
So what that adds to beer in turn is a sort of smooth, creamy mouthfeel.
Yeah, it's a really fun one to use because it has a little bit more complexity, a little bit more earthy grittiness than just a white wheat. It's not as, standard classic Widmer Hefeweizen wheat. It's got a little bit of character to it, but without being distracting. And that extra body is really good when you're going into these high alcohol beers, especially because these high alcohol beers in a Belgian style IPA, the extra alcohol is probably coming from a simple sugar source. Someone said, do you use candy sugar in a Belgian IPA? And you absolutely can.
Heck yeah.
So we happen to use just regular cane sugar in the one that we did, but Belgian candy sugar is certainly appropriate.
Yep. So what was I going to go into? Oh yeah, red wheat. So red wheat is actually a bit of a misnomer too. People think that because it has red, it might actually have a little bit higher color. It might even add a red color to the beer, and that's not the case. The color is actually basically the same as white wheat. So you can feel free to use this in pretty high quantities. I wouldn't be, for this style, be afraid to throw 20, 30%, maybe even more at it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you're just going to get more and more of that creaminess the more you use.
And real quick before we go on, we got somebody asking how we use ascorbic acid. That's asked almost every week now. In a 5-gallon batch, we use ascorbic acid at about 3 grams per 5-gallon batch. That's somewhere for one barrel we do between 10 and 20 grams. We personally use it in the mash. It is stable enough to maintain its properties all the way through the entire cooking process. However, if you're just using it for a stabilizer, feel free to throw it in the fermenter or even just right before packaging. Either way, it's going to work fine.
Yep. So let's go on to our hop of the week. And this one might be a little surprising for an IPA, but unless you're doing a traditional English IPA, that is, because that is going to be East Kent Golding. And that's really for the balancing purposes of the fruity quality that you're going to get from the yeast, right?
Exactly. So you can use both New World and Old World style hops in a Belgian IPA, but with getting the extra fruitiness off of the Belgian yeast and also some fruitiness off of the fruity New World style hops, it's a really good idea to balance that out with some sort of earthy tones. And the one that we use, and I think it worked phenomenally, East Kent Goldings is just a really great balancing hop to use.
So that is going to be East Kent Golding. Otherwise, a few kind of fun things. So it is a fairly old hop. What is it? 1790? Really?
1790 is the first release, yeah. First called Canterbury Goldings. Canterbury Goldings was, a lot of people still today think that it's a different hop than East Kent Goldings. They are the same thing. It was just renamed East Kent Goldings in 1838. Other than that, so 1790 was the first release of this hop, and it's a really, really great hop, and surprising that such a phenomenal hop cropped up that early on.
Yep. In fact, one of the hops I believe that went into our double Belgian IPA was a daughter of East Kent Golding.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. I was going to say. So, fantastic hop. Otherwise, there's some new ones that are daughters of East Kent Golding, but generally that heritage is going to set you in the right direction for your hop profile. So let's go on to our yeast of the week, which is probably what everybody's wondering by now as we're talking about balancing the yeast. And we chose the Trappist High Gravity strain, and that is for a couple of reasons. One of them is that it has the right kind of a balance that you're looking for. It's not going to be too phenolic. It's not going to throw off like those really intense like peppery notes like a French Saison strain might, and it's not going to be super clovey like a wit beer strain. It might kind of overwhelm a beer. So
it's also not going to be super plummy like even just a classic Abbey strain. The high
or
gravity
even the Ardennes.
Really
yeah. And they actually say specifically in the style guidelines that the yeast strain, choosing the yeast strain and blending it with the proper hops is the most crucial part about finding balance in a Belgian IPA.
Yeah, so we like the Trappist High Gravity because it's a strong fermenter. And it can go up into those higher alcohol percentages. Like I said, ours ended up 11.2%. It can go up to those higher alcohol percentages without getting super distracting with the extra flavors that it's producing. So it's not going to produce those stressful extra phenols and esters from that high alcohol percentage like some of the lower Abbey strains would.
Yeah. And then the other nice thing about it is that it does tend to flocculate a little bit faster than other Belgian strains, which just lends into the whole practice of, you're brewing an IPA. This is something you want to turn over quickly. It's something that you're probably not going to want to bottle condition for 6 months. But with that said, it should hold up well. But also, one of the qualities that I think people don't like about this strain is it does tend to produce a little bit of fusels and a little bit of that alcoholic bite, which honestly, when you're brewing something like an IPA, that's actually going to push those hops through more.
Yeah.
It's going to accentuate the bitterness. So it actually plays really, really well when using it for this specific style. Kind of the opposite effect that if you're trying to shoot for a traditional Belgian blonde, for instance, is something that you really don't want in there. You don't want that alcoholic bite in a blonde.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to be complementing all the other flavors that are in it. Belgian blondes are supposed to be soft and supple. Supple sounds like a good word to use. And supple. And so, that alcohol bite can come through. But against hops, alcohol is actually a really great character or carrier of hop flavor compounds.
Oh, somebody's already asking about combining yeast.
Combining yeast is something we do almost
hold tight to that.
Yeah, we do every single time. That will go into. That is also foreshadowing for our final topic of today.
Yeah, so that pretty much sums up our beer of the week, but that will be a fantastic transition because our hop schedules are something we have not talked about yet, and that is because, like any good IPA these days, staged dry hopping and biotransformation dry hopping is a thing.
It's right. So we decided, we've had a couple questions recently on doing multiple dry hops. Someone even asked if it's worthwhile to do 3 dry hops, to which we say no. 2 dry hops is probably the most you'd need. And sometimes you can go one or the other. But staged dry hopping is actually the best way to maximize the effect of dry hopping because you're really getting 2 different final compounds from one type of dry hopping versus the other. So let's talk about the 2 different types of dry hopping first.
So first off, we have your traditional dry hopping, which, my methods that I've fallen into are generally you let the beer ferment, and then I try to time it 3 to 4 days before I plan on racking the beer out of my primary fermenter, be it in a keg, be it to bottling, and basically take pelletized hops, throw them right into my fermenter, and let them do their thing. They settle out within a day or two, and I get that nice traditional dry hop impact.
Now, one thing that you don't want to do when you're doing the traditional dry hopping, which again, you don't want to be doing this dry hop method for more than a couple of days because you don't want to risk the vegetal effect that you can get from all the leaf matter that's in those dry hops. But one thing that you want to avoid doing is actually packaging these things too tight. We've had it happen where we put these into let's say that carboy dry hopping tube, and the dry hops, they expand really quickly and kind of form a barrier on the outside of the dry hops, and so they get some effect, but the maximum contact area of the hops at that point isn't really it's not really utilized, so you're missing out on a lot of the flavor of the hops because you're not getting a full infusion effect.
Yeah, that's generally why my practice is I throw them directly into the fermenter, let them sit down to the bottom, and then you just make sure that you're not siphoning them into whatever you're going to transfer the beer into.
Right. On the commercial scale, one thing that we have noted here is that on the commercial scale, they actually have mechanisms. They have equipment that they'll use in line to make sure that when they're dry hopping, they can transfer all their beer through a screen that's covered with these dry hops, and so that ensures that literally all the beer is going through all the hops and it's maximizing that contact effect. Something that we don't have on the homebrew scale, but if you are throwing in the hops loose, that's probably the best way to do it. That's also the most risky way to do it when it comes to maybe getting that plant matter effect. And so that's kind of the balance that you're going for.
Yep, and that's why usually that shorter time frame is going to end up better for you. I've even actually heard of dry hopping for as little as 24 hours.
Yeah.
Which, definitely if you've got the hops to spare is a great way to go. I think you probably actually get the best aromatic quality, but at the same time you're giving into utilization on that. So you're not utilizing your dry hops quite as much for that 24 hours, but generally 3 or 4 days you kind of peak out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the 5 days is kind of my maximum. Do not go more than 5 days. 3 days seems to be a really good average for a lot of people.
Yep.
Give them time to really soak in and infuse as much as possible. But also, don't be wasting your money by throwing in too much dry hops if you can't get the proper infusion rate. Like, that's the thing that we're playing against as home brewers. We're playing against what the big boys can do, where they can use, let's say, 2 ounces equivalent for a 5-gallon batch, can get the same flavor that we're already getting for 4 ounces per 5-gallon batch in these dry hops. And so if we kind of start throwing more and more and more hops at it, we're just kind of basically throwing money at nothing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I saw Rogue actually a couple years ago. They had a big pump hooked up to one of their fermenters, and they were just recirculating the living daylights out of that beer. And I believe the guy, if I remember, he said it was because they were doing a big dry hop with it. So.
Yeah, I mean, also a good thing to note when you're looking at these breweries that are saying, hey, I'm hopping at this many pounds per barrel, that's not scalable.
Yeah. Matt, that is not a hopback. A hopback's going to be different. Underback, though, that's a term I haven't heard yet. I suppose it could be an underback.
It could be, yeah. Depending on where it's coming out of.
Yep, that's probably more appropriate for that. And then
you could utilize something that's similar to a hopback, but what they do on the big scale is not a hopback, because hopbacks by definition have a little bit of exposure to oxygen. Not that they need to, but what they're doing is they're actually they have a vacuum, basically suction in line, that's pulling the beer through a hop screen and through graded filters. And this is when you're getting into the at least 30 barrel size, like really, really big size.
Bam. Also, to kind of half answer Eric's question that just popped up, generally dry hopping is going to be performed at warmer temperatures, closer to room temperature, and that's just because you get that vegetal matter. You'll end up getting more of that if you do it at a cold temperature. That's just our personal experience with dry hopping.
And when it comes to grams per liter when dry hopping, I'm going to have to do a little bit of mental math. When it comes to grams per liter, so if I'm saying 4 ounces per 5 gallons, that's 19 liters.
Turn it up to 11.
And
actually, that's probably a good round number, 11 grams.
19 liters and 120 grams. So whatever 120 divided by 19 is, that's probably what you're aiming for total dry hop, both stages combined.
11 grams per liter. That should be a pretty epic dry hop.
Perfect. Anyways, moving on. So let's talk. So we've talked about traditional dry hopping. That's dry hopping after your beer is crashed and done fermenting. Now let's talk about biotransformation, which there's a lot of juicy information to come from biotransformation dry hopping. Pun intended.
Sure is, because I would know if I read my best practices for biotransformation handout directly in front of me before this. Yeah, actually, I'm kind of excited to read this. Unfortunately, I did not do it before. Ooh, but I see one of my my favorite words on here, which is beta-glucans.
Yeah. Yep. So actually, it's a beta glucosidase.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So the biggest thing when it comes to biotransformation, we did get some questions recently about what yeasts can biotransformation. Someone asked if Chico can biotransformation. Chico is USO5. It's 1056, and it's also BRY97. So if Logan looks at his graph right there, he will see that Chico Ale can or cannot
do what?
Biotransformation. Well, it can beta glucosidase.
It looks like it can.
It's got a tall little point on the graph. So what the graph that Logan's looking at is actually the production of beta glucosidase. Beta glucosidase is an enzyme that is produced by yeast during fermentation, which actually all yeasts do produce.
Huh,
so
I'll be damned.
The short answer is every yeast can biotransformation, just in different ways. And biotransformation is actually something that's very misunderstood, because you need to take it in two different parts. One is the breaking down of glucosides. Glycosides is what they're called. Glycosides are basically a glucose molecule attached to some sort of an aromatic or flavorful molecule. And the production of beta-glucosidase does what?
Breaks down beta-glucans. Am I right?
Glucosides.
Beta-glucosides.
Glycosides. I got it wrong. A lot of this is actually information that I researched this morning and didn't know before today.
But those are going to add body to a beer, right?
So the glycosides, if they're still there, would be body, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But what we're talking about specifically is relatively low in terms of the overall impact in terms of body, because they're the glycosides that come from hops. So glycosides are
okay. So these are not coming from grains, and these are coming from hops specifically.
Right. Yeah. So,
okay.
But this will also come back into play when it comes, because there are glycosides that come from all sorts of different sources, grains, hops, whatever, and this will play a really big role in terms of when we talk about the topic number 2. Again, foreshadowing. But glycosides and hops basically are a glucose molecule attached to some sort of a terpene or an aromatic oil that is in hops, and yeast that produce beta-glucosidase. I need to read before I actually... Glucosidase. Yes. Beta-glucosidase. Breaks these apart, separates the glucose molecule from the aromatic or flavorful molecule, and then the aromatic flavorful molecule is in the beer.
For those of you that think it's funny when Peter gets super, super nerdy, please smash that like button, because I do see there is 133 watching right now. So what he's trying to say, though, is that having that in there causes causes haze and it causes a different impact on the hopping of the beer.
Exactly. So you're getting more aroma off of the beer when the yeast is actively acting on the hop oils. And this happens in two different ways. So you have, first of all, that breakage of the aromatic component from the glucose molecule that comes from the hops. And then the second way that happens is actually the transformation of terpenes, or monoterpenes to be specifically. And that is completely independent of the beta-glycosidase activity. And so a lot of people have commented on our original How to NEPA Haze Craze Like a Boss video saying, I thought only certain yeasts can do biotransformation. Every yeast can do biotransformation. Their level that they do the biotransformation, that myth, so to speak, actually comes from the beta-glucosidase production. But all yeast, regardless of beta-glucosidase production, can actually still turn the monoterpenes into more stable and aromatic compounds.
Yes, that actually explains a lot in dry hopping and why you actually get kind of like, it still seems like you're adding bitterness even though you're not. It's because,
right.
Yeah, it's because you're changing those terpenes in there.
Yep.
Changing that dankness and the fruitiness.
That's right. Specifically, they are geraniol that you're changing into citronellol, and linalool that you're changing into terpeneol.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
If you want to know all the words.
Geraniol, fun facts. Geraniums, that's what it smells like.
Yeah. So yeah. Geraniums, they're a little bit more bitter. Like the geraniol as a terpene in hops is actually a little bit on the bitter side, like a little bit of the aggro side, whereas citronellol is actually a much softer, like peachy, grapefruity kind of flavor.
Yes, sure is.
So that's why biotransformation, that's why juicies are juicy, whereas, and that's also why you get different flavors off of doing a biotransformation dry hop versus a late stage / your yeast is already done doing its yeast dry hop.
So let's talk about, other than the impact on flavor, also the impact on the overall stability, though, of what it does to beer. And, and because I feel like that's equally important that people probably don't know out there.
So the big thing that comes from the late stage dry hop is a huge aromatic component. The thing about aromatics, though, they are all oils, and they are not just regular oils. They are oils that love to evaporate and break down
and go into your nose.
Yes. And so your late stage dry hops that you're getting all those oils off of, those nice aromatics. So your second stage when you're doing a 2-stage dry hop, those are they have a very short shelf life, but they're bright and aromatic, and they impart a great flavor on the beer, but their shelf life is not very long compared to biotransformation dry hops.
So yeah, wait, what were you saying? Sorry, I was distracted reading comments.
No, I was trying. Yeah, I don't know. I was trying to lead into like you saying some stuff.
Oh.
The biotransformation, the reduction into citronellol and terpeneol, those are actually very stable compounds, and so those will be really great, juicy, flavor-building compounds in your beer long term, which means that a properly biotransformation dry hopped beer can retain its dry hop flavor and some aroma for a lot longer than just a regular dry hopped beer if it's crashed and then dry hopped.
So yeah, so ultimately, definitely hit up any kind of New World IPA. Honestly, I'd say any IPA just in general.
Yeah.
Just because you're going to get a different flavor from the hops. You're going to get a more stable flavor profile from the hops. And, it's a practice that's fairly easy to do. With that said, as long as you have a way to remove the hops from the beer. So let's talk about easy ways to do that. And I think the most straightforward one, if you have the equipment, is to do a dump. So you're just going to dump the hops out the bottom from your dump valve with your yeast. But a lot of people also don't have that way to do that. So what are some other recommendations?
So another recommendation that you can is as long as you can get this in a completely CO2 closed system, which we talked a little bit about when you did our how to transfer in a closed system with the catalyst fermenter that Logan did a couple weeks ago. But you can also do this out of the fermenter and into your final vessel through a large micron filter. So you don't want to go like an actual beer filter, like a let's say a 5 micron or even 10 micron. That's too small. It's going to trap all the stuff, and it's going to get clogged. Basically, it's going to be really hard to work with, and it also runs the risk of stripping out some flavors. But if you have, let's say a 400 micron filter in a 10-inch filter housing, that's a great way to strip out a lot of the gunk, but leave a lot of the good stuff in there, and then also hopefully reduce the risk of clogging your whole filter. So you can filter into either bottles or kegs at that point.
Yeah, so that's one option, is basically going adding your Biotransformation hop addition and then trying not to leave that in there too long. What you can actually do is you can rack the beer, which is a practice that we do a lot. We will actually rack the beer into a corny keg on day 6 or 7, sometimes even day 5, actually, before the beer's even completely finished fermenting.
Just kind of depending on the activity of the. So we take a look at the beer.
It all depends on the activity. Generally, when we start seeing that the fermentation is coming through its final stages, at that point we'll rack it into a corny keg, which will let it spund in the corny keg, which just means we're going to seal it up. It's going to build up a little bit of pressure, which is okay, because also that's going to make sure that it doesn't get oxidized during that process. And then at that point, you can actually add your second dry hop. You can add that for your few days. And then usually we're going to have to add that with some kind of we have little hop tubes that we'll have to add into the keg. And then from there, we will actually rack that into a second keg, which is a little bit of a process. But then we end up with beer that doesn't sit on hops too long. And it also actually helps to get some of the yeast to drop out, so we don't have nearly as much yeast sediment in our final serving keg.
So using a corny keg as a bright tank is a very common practice when we're doing 5-gallon batches, and it's a really great way to actually be able to keep everything under pressure and also maximize the contact time of those hops with your beer. So really make sure that we're infusing all the maximum flavor that we can while still having a clear and a beer that's off all of the things that can cause bad flavors in the final keg.
Yeah. Ooh, somebody's asking about dry hopping during pressure fermentation. I got an idea for that, but I'll get to that at the end of the show here.
That takes some equipment. It is very, very possible.
Yes, very possible, ultimately. But lastly, let's talk about probably the simplest just workaround for trying to get these hops in without oxidizing beer and not really worrying about that 3 to 4 day period like we mentioned earlier, and that is using lupulin hops. And so, what is it? They're known as hop hash, or we got the cryo hops, or the ones
T45s.
Yeah, or T45s. And essentially what it is they're hops that most of the bract or the plant material has been shaken off of them and removed. So you end up with a whole lot of the lupulin glands, a whole lot of the oily bits, and none of that plant material that's going to give you that chlorophyll type flavor. Those are wonderful as a biotransformation hop because you can basically throw them right in there and forget about them and just leave them in the whole time. They don't tend to produce that grassiness that you'll get with a more traditional hop.
Or at least the risk is way, way, way lower.
Yes, exactly.
So fantastic option. So get some super, super fresh dank cryo hops and add those to every single beer. We've got a lot of questions asking about how we are going to close transfer so use CO2 to close transfer and or dry hop under CO2, dry hop under pressure ferment. Do you want to go over that a little bit, or you want to save that for the quick Q&A at the end?
We'll save that for the Q&A. Let's hit our next
big topic.
Next big topic, yes.
All right. So stay tuned to the very end because we will go over all those fun CO2, dry hopping, close transfer techniques and everything like that at the end for our Q&A. But we do have a really fun, and I'm really excited about it, one of my favorite styles of beers topics to go over next, which is Farmhouse beers.
Yes, Farmhouse beers are one of my favorite parts of the summer, honestly, because they're hard to find too.
They really are.
And
especially done properly.
Yeah, what a Farmhouse beer is it's literally just usually a nice, light, and refreshing Belgian style beer. Traditionally, they're going to be fermented with saison strains, but that's not necessarily. It doesn't have to be the case.
Yeah, you can ferment them with either a saison strain to start off with, or you can even ferment them with a neutral yeast. Let's say, a nice clean British yeast, like British ale, nothing that's super fruity, obviously, or even just a Chico ale, American ale strain. But the trick to Farmhouse ales is actually the mixed culture that you're going to be adding post or during fermentation.
Yeah, a lot of times you're going to see usually at least a couple different yeast strains for these. And then also these are one of the perfect beer styles to throw some Brett at.
Absolutely, which is why they're a really good style to brew in the summer, because in the summer you've got access to warm temperatures in your house. At least where we are at, it doesn't take a lot to get a room up to 80 degrees where we're at. And so being able to do these mixed fermentations with yeast that like to live in a warm temperature, for example, Brett, or even the bacteria that like to live at warm temperatures, it actually produces a more complex profile on your beer a lot faster. And so these wild farmhouse style ales usually, if you were to ferment them at like 60 to 70 degrees classic fermentation temperature, they wouldn't really produce anything super interesting, at least for a year or for a long amount of time. But if you do have access to a very warm room, you can get some really fun flavors in as little as 3 months.
Yeah. With that said, using either Brettanomyces or a diastaticus yeast strain like your Saison strains, these things are going to chew through some sugars. They're actually going to leave you with a dry body regardless. That means that you're going to have to adjust your grain bill accordingly.
Absolutely. So we like to make sure that we're starting with a heavy adjunct grain bill. That means lots of proteins and lots of long chain sugars. Things like flaked wheat, things like the red wheat that we mentioned earlier would be great. Or even unmalted grains like unmalted wheat, unmalted barley, torrefied wheat. That's basically unmalted wheat that's puffed up like a Rice Krispie. And so it's got a little bit like toasty kind of quality to it. All those are great options to build body and give your bugs, your little culture in there, something to chew on long term.
Yep. And then next part is going to be to let these guys kind of go low and slow. Speaking of your multiple pitches, multiple yeast strains, you'll typically start with some kind of a base yeast. I mean, the Bella Saison strain is one that just kind of comes to mind. That's a great start.
It's a go-to.
But also, I actually love to do a Belgian Saison strain to get some of those bubblegum notes.
Yeah.
And I will let that actually go through a primary fermentation for about a week, trying to ferment that as hot as I can get it, 80 degrees plus, 90s even better, honestly. And then I'll pitch another yeast strain on top of that. Usually either a French Saison, or that's actually not a bad point to add the Brettanomyces, just because the Belgian Saison strains have a tendency to get stalled out and not want to finish on you.
So once that's kind of through its fermentation, you've got some other workhorses basically to do the rest of the job for you. So the easiest way to add kind of a full mixed culture is just to buy a pre-mixed culture. Rosalaire, it's got Saccharomyces, it's got bread, it's got petio, it's got lacto, it's got all that stuff. And before we get too deep into all the different things you can add at this point, let's first of all talk about how farmhouses are a very, very wide style. They're not like a one style of beer. They're a very, very wide range of flavors. But when we're brewing them, I think we both kind of like to go for that nice, dry, bright, somewhat citrusy, a little bit barnyardy, a little bit hay-like kind of quality, and a refreshing drinking beer.
I want that fall flavor. Because,
exactly.
That's why we're talking to you guys today about them is – because if you brew them now, they should be ready to drink and in their prime come August or September.
Yeah, which is the perfect time to, you get some, at least where we're at, we get some nice hot days and we get some nice not so hot days. And this is a really good bridge behind it. It's got that earthiness. It's got enough stuff going on that it still tastes great kind of no matter what.
Yeah. During that fermentation and during that aging time, I would actually recommend just leaving the beer in a single primary fermentation too. That yeast will be just fine. You actually want some of that yeast to be in there. Any yeast that dies and breaks down will just give more nutrient to the next yeast, be it bread or any other strain that's in there, that's going to be slowly breaking down those residual sugars over the next couple months.
And one of the nice things about a good mixed culture, a proper mixed culture, which obviously there's people like Omega Labs, White Labs, Imperial, they all have really good mixed cultures that they've kind of pre-calculated to work for you in the strain, is that they have the right bugs in there to eat anything that's going to create off flavors during this time. So let's say, for example, oxygen can get into your beer over a certain amount of time, which there are bacteria that can create vinegar in the presence of oxygen. Certain strains of Brett actually in low presence of oxygen can also eat vinegar. So there's these mixed cultures are really, really great for actually creating a semi-stable overall atmosphere where you're kind of guaranteed to get a pretty dang good beer at the end of the process.
Aaron's wanting us to make a Farmhouse IPA. He's asking about dry hopping them. Ultimately, yeah, you actually could very much dry hop them.
Farmhouse beers are super good.
Yeah. With that said, dry hop them right before you plan on packaging them. Don't like try to dry hop them and then rack them into a second fermenter or something. Let them go and do their thing. Sample the beer. If you feel like some dry hops might benefit it, go for it.
Yeah.
I think the world is your oyster when it comes to hop variety. Just because, like Peter said, these are such a wide style of beer. It's all going to depend on kind of what you're starting with, You might want to go with, a little bit more traditional noble type hops, maybe some Sauser varieties, or you might want to kind of up the game and throw some New World hops at it. So.
Mosaic Cryos or something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
all of it's good. Depending on what the base beer is, if it's lighter and lemony, like I think a New World hop goes really, really great. If it's one of those amber style,
Yep. Yeah,
dry,
definitely.
I think like a Sauser's perfect.
Stick with more earthy. I expect some earthiness from a Farmhouse too.
Usually when you say Farmhouse, you expect earthiness.
Yeah, definitely expect some of that. And then let's kind of during that aging process, let's talk about one other thing, and that's actually introducing some oak into it.
Absolutely.
And I think that these beers are a great way to sort of dip your toes in the water of oaking beer. You're going to have beer sitting in a fermenter for a couple months, so that's definitely a great time to hit it with a few oak chips. That's the easiest way to do it by far. Just throw a few oak chips. You can soak them in some alcohol if you want. Otherwise, you can just toast them to whatever level you want to play with. And I think less is more in this situation, just because the chips are going to be exposed to the beer for such a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Like 4 ounces of oak chips, which is usually a standard homebrew packet, because their surface area is so high that oak actually infuses really fast.
Yeah, for a 5-gallon batch or 20-liter batch, 20 liter, 22 liter.
19 liters, 5 gallons.
Something like that, yeah.
Math.
I probably would only use about an ounce or 28 point some change grams of oak chips in it.
Yeah.
So that should be plenty to get you actually a pretty significant oak flavor.
And if you want to get super crazy, you can pitch that oak into future beers as your inoculant.
Yeah, super cool.
So, yeah, that's also possible. All right, I think that wraps up doing Farmhouse beers, unless you guys got extra questions on those, which we will for sure answer. But now let's move on to our Q&A, and I know we've got some Q's to A.
All about hops.
Yes.
All right, we're gonna finally get you guys some answers here. Let's just go right into the question about pressure fermentation and adding dry hops. And what comes to my mind is actually rigging up a sight glass with some butterfly valves. Is that what you're thinking too?
That's exactly what I was thinking, and that's why it does take some technique to be able to pull this off.
I'm gonna go grab it real fast.
Yeah, he's gonna grab a sight glass and maybe even grab our 5-gallon fermenters that work with those. The thing with pressure fermentation is, and doing a dry hop with pressure fermentation, is it's going to take a certain level of equipment, and there is a cost in doing so. And so what we have here is we have a sight glass. Sight glass is perfect for capturing yeast. We use it for yeast capturing all the time, but it's also perfect for being able to put a butterfly valve on both ends, meaning that you can get dry hops that are perfectly CO2 purged by putting a butterfly valve on both ends and CO2 purging through one end and closing them off. And then you can put that on top of your tank that's under pressure fermentation. That tank would also need a butterfly valve or some sort of an opening system on it. And then you would be able to put the sight glass on top of that and basically open the whole thing up, or open the tank and the bottom of the sight glass up, and the hops would drop right in. This is something that's actually done on the commercial scale quite a bit. They have systems for being able to do pressure fermentation dry hops, and it's not something that's easy or cheap to do on the homebrew scale, unfortunately.
Sure. It's going to take some equipment, but I'm sure there's some people out there that can figure out a way to jinkify this. All right, so these are our super cheap Amazon fermenters. They're probably out of focus, but they have a 1.5 triclo port on them.
Like Logan's saying, further away from the microphone so that you probably can't hear it super well. Those are the Amazon fermenters that we got that we did a video on, posted last week or something like that. They have a triclo fitting on the top, which means that these, for the price, are the best fermenters for trying to do something like this, which is why we bought these in the first place. This is, the SS Brewtech brew buckets, which are their competitors, quote unquote, can't do this because they don't have a tri-clamp top.
So what you'll need if you want to rig this up are going to be two 1.5-inch butterfly valves, which will tri-clamp one right directly on there. Next, you'll take a sight glass, or it doesn't actually have to even be a sight glass, some kind of a sealable tube. We're basically making a, think of the space station, and you got your airlocks on the space station, right? And then your next one will sit right on top of there, and then how that's going to work, you got the one closed, you got pressure underneath here. You're going to add your hops, fill up the tube.
The tube is not that it would matter, but the tube is probably pre-purged with CO2.
Yeah, with this guy open, like that. You're going to and then you'll close up the top one once you get them on there. You're going to open up the bottom one. You're going to let gravity do its job. So fairly straightforward in that sense. Like we mentioned, though, only downside is that you're looking at probably like $70, maybe closer to $100.
No, that's over $100 just
Yeah.
in the stuff that's on top of the fermenter right there.
So a little bit expensive, but very doable. And I'm sure there is a way to hack this. So
yeah, but basically what you're aiming for is you're aiming for a way that CO2 can escape at the same time that hops are falling in. Obviously, hops are lighter than CO2 or heavier than CO2, so they're going to drop through no matter what you have. But it's some sort of system that works kind of like this. The other option is to just be bubbling CO2 up through the bottom of your fermenter and open and close it really quickly. The downside of that, obviously, if you're pressure fermenting, is as soon as you open that whole thing up, there's a bunch of foam that's going to come to the surface. So
somebody was just asking about that, how to prevent that. That would probably be the same method because you're not actually releasing the pressure on it.
yeah.
So
A lot of
or
homebrew
be super quick.
Yeah, a lot of homebrew systems actually can't do this kind of stuff, and that's the biggest reason that we bought that fermenter to do a review on from Amazon is because of that tri-clamp top and the tri-clamp side. Like it makes it have a lot of utility that you can get when you're doing beers on the commercial scale that you cannot get as a home brewer. And so just being able to do something like this is one of the benefits of buying a fermenter like that, even though those particular fermenters we had to do a lot of work to make them actually work.
Certainly so. And then so the next question was kind of about our what percentage of our hops go in when we're talking about all these different dry hop additions, right?
Yeah, and I think they mentioned Whirlpool as well. So if we were to, let's say we're to do a classic New England hazy IPA or something like that, where we're probably not going to add any boil additions, or if they are, they're going to be completely nominal. When it comes to adding for a 5-gallon batch, 8 ounces of hops, which is kind of our minimum for 5-gallon batches for really, really juicy IPAs, I would say at bare minimum, 4 to 5 ounces are going to go in the Whirlpool.
So I shoot for the general range of, anywhere from a half pound to honestly 12 ounces of hops, which might sound crazy, but that actually seems to have the biggest bang for your buck. You start getting upwards of a pound or more. I think you start losing your utilization, so you're throwing more hops out of beer for not getting as much flavor. But a half pound to 12 ounces is probably a good number to shoot for. Like Peter said, putting about 5 ounces or 6 ounces in the Whirlpool is probably a good start. And then I would more or less split the difference between your Biotransformation dry hop and then your late dry hop, putting in 3 to 4 ounces in each one of those.
Yeah, so there's lots of ways to get big hop flavors doing all that. But
you definitely don't want to skimp on the Whirlpool. You get a ton of flavor from that.
It's stable flavor.
It's stable flavor, and also you do want some bitterness, especially if you're not adding any bittering hop, which is a practice that we do all the time. Having that utilization in the Whirlpool means you're going to have to up the overall amount of hops that go into the beer.
Yeah, so if you want to get super specific, maybe let's say we're going to add 3 ounces at flame out to 190. So like right when you start chilling down with your immersion chill or something like that, 3 ounces there, and then another 3 ounces again during Whirlpool down to the 170 range. Then chill the rest of the way down, and then during dry hop add 2 to 3 ounces during Biotransformation and 2 to 3 ounces during the late stage dry hop.
Somebody, we got Diamond Roads is asking about fruiting and or coffeeing big stouts, and whether we rack in the secondary with ground or whole beans, muslin, all kinds of question there. To answer at least one of those questions right away, whole beans, always whole beans. If you try to grind the beans, you end up getting too much vegetal character from them. That's just beers that we've tasted, beers that we've experimented with using coffee. So whole beans cold is always the way to go whenever you're adding any kind of coffee flavor, unless you want to get that like super extra astringent bite. But in something like a stout, usually you've got plenty of that there to begin with. So I wouldn't find that necessary under, all but a very specific case that you're trying to go for. As for fruit, that's a tricky one for stouts. Fruit, because typically if you're going to have a stout, you'll want you don't want more than just the fruit flavor. You want the fruit sweetness coming through, which means you might actually have to alter the recipe, design the recipe to be sweeter than you would prefer, because usually when we add fruit, especially post fermentation, which is something that we do a lot, or as a secondary fermentation, it tends to dry beer out and make it a little bit more acidic.
We got another question about how do you. So we got a couple questions that are a little bit further up. One of them is how to lower the pH of a kegged beer. The easiest thing to do, which we actually do all the time, is just add lactic or phosphoric acid right into the keg.
Lactic acid all the way.
Yeah. If you want to, we've actually done that with completely souring kegged beers. What we'll do is we'll create a little system where we've got a little syringe full of lactic acid, and we got the coupler that goes into the gas side, and we'll just gravity right in, and it works really well. But you can do that. You can dose that to whatever. If you're just trying to lower the overall pH for general body and mouthfeel, or if you're trying to like actually do enough to sour it, either way you can do that. You can add lactic or phosphoric acid right to the keg. If you're adding a lot of acid, obviously lactic is going to be the better way to go because it's a soft, sweet acid which tastes really nice. We also got one that's what's the best way to dry hop with quake yeast? Quake yeast can ferment in just a couple of days, and so I've done beers where we've dry hopped within a day of starting fermentation. I was
going to say 24 hours, yeah. Just depends on how hot you're fermenting that yeast strain, and how hard it's going to rip through that fermentation.
Yeah.
Somebody's asking about if they can carbonate up a flat soda with a soda stream, or flat beer, sorry, with a soda stream. Yes, you definitely can. It's going to be expensive, though, so if you've got a 5-pound CO2 tank and regulator kicking around, that's going to be a much more economical option for you.
Yeah, I have seen people do it, though.
And then, somebody's asking about diacetyl creep. Ben, you're wicked smart. Diacetyl creep can happen for sure, and that is usually why we like to let our beers sit warm for just a little bit longer on those dry hops, or after we dry hop, to make sure it's still sitting in contact with the yeast for long enough.
That's also why with both our dry hops, we did not say dry hop them cold.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is actually another good reason not to dry hop cold. Diacetyl creep is definitely a thing if you dry hop cold, because your yeast is much less active. Otherwise, more or less, yeah, as long as we dry hop warm and let that fermentation go through, complete itself, we have had no issues with diacetyl creep here.
That said, it also is yeast dependent, and so you do have some yeast that will not produce diacetyl. It's just not part of their metabolism.
Bam. What was another one I just saw?
I heard that some hops don't work, or that hops don't work well with certain bacteria, at least in sours. So for farmhouse ales, that is true. Most farmhouse ales are not pre-hopped, but they can be hopped. It really depends. And so there's the biggest culprit in terms of being hop sensitive is lactobacillus. Lactobacillus, a lot of strains cannot survive over like 4 IBUs or something like that. But there are some strains, especially new strains, now that brewers have been doing their brewery thing and causing massive evolution on the yeast and bacteria world. There are some strains that can survive like 30 IBUs.
I know the Plantarum is a little bit higher. I think that's like 10 or 15. The Buchneri strain that's the super, super low one that you're talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are some strains that can survive like 30 IBUs. So just kind of depends on what you're going for there. Lactose it's a fun little.
But if you're dry hopping, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, if you're dry hopping, doesn't matter.
You got your full fermentation, you get your almost final product, and then you're going ahead and just like right before you package it, you're just going ahead and add those dry hops, and then they're good.
Chris is asking about reopening our tap room. Our tap room is already reopened, Chris. We actually were able to open here in Washington 2 weeks ago now.
Yeah.
So we've got some other restrictions, but it actually has been nice to finally like give people samples more than anything again. And so we are back open and running under social distancing guidelines. Reading. Everybody's reading.
Someone's got a spike fermenter and needs CO2 for it. Is there a difference between food grade and industrial grade CO2? Yes.
Somewhat so, yeah. Usually you want to stick with food grade because the industrial grade, it might have some oils in it, and if you end up getting those oils in your beer, it's just gonna not have good things.
Yeah, it's the only difference is the oil content.
I believe though that the CO2 provider in at least in Spokane, they only have food grade CO2, so. It's all the same whether or not you are, buying it for industrial use or food grade use. So unless they stipulate, for the most part, it's going to be food grade.
Someone's adding that their whirlpool/hop stand is usually around 170 degrees. Fun fact about whirlpool additions or hop stand additions is that you get a different flavor off of your hops at 170 to 180 degrees than you do off of like 140 to 150. And again, with warmer. There are so what people say is that if you do the hop stand at 170 to 180, it's usually around that citrusy kind of bright quality with a little bit of fruitiness. Whereas if you do it a little bit lower, you get more like tropical fruit notes.
Yeast.
Different grades of hop stands.
Somebody's asking about yeast starters. Yeast starters are really going to depend on the beer you're brewing. Generally, you want to make up really big yeast starters for beers that you want to have a nice, clean, crispy profile to. For Belgians, I think we actually skipped over somebody's question earlier about Belgian IPAs and the yeast pitch rates on those. Those I usually like to stick on right kind of in the moderate side of things. I try not to super underpitch like you might with a click strain. Yeah. But definitely you don't need to make big starters, to the point where you're pitching, stupid amounts of cells like you might for a lager or like for a super clean West Coast IPA. So yeah, always build up a starter is what we recommend. But don't worry about, pitching 400 billion cells into a 5-gallon batch. I think that's probably a little overkill as long as those, 1 to 200 billion cells are going to be super healthy.
Someone had a really fun idea when it comes to dry hopping. So put all your dry hops in a bag, right? No matter what your fermenter is.
The magnet?
The magnet.
Yeah, that was brilliant.
Put a
Whoever
magnet
said that. I did read that. I was like,
put another magnet on top of the fermenter, and then when it comes time to dry hop, just lift the magnet.
Yeah,
so the whole thing drops.
Only issue I might see with that is I want to say we've done something similar to that, and it actually plugged up our dip tube because the bag fell down to the bottom. Yeah, and then it was a giant pain in the butt to deal with.
But for like a bucket fermenter or for like a
for something that you're just gonna siphon out the top anyway, which isn't the best for a big hazy IPA.
Yeah.
But
I'd be curious to see what the sustainability of the. You'd have to add the bag with the magnet to the bottom of the fermenter lid, like during high krausen, to make sure that it's like fully sealed.
Well, I know we did that with when we were like fermenting in our bright tank for doing some hazies. We'd bag the hops up and just stick them on the little chilling coil.
Yeah.
So.
But during a dry hop, that's a fun idea.
Calculating bitterness when doing a no-chill. Ooh, that's a great question. Definitely up your utilization on the no-chill. I would probably figure about 10 to 15% utilization on whatever hops you're adding in post-boil.
If you're doing a no-chill, basically like let your beer start to naturally cool down, and when it's at like 205, just add all your hops in and then just wait. Yeah,
that would help too. Yeah, anything... Yeah, once you get down below like 200 degrees, I want to say is sort of that threshold.
No-chill IPAs would be super hard to pull off, honestly.
Yeah. Once you get down below 200 degrees, you're actually not extracting hardly any bitterness at all past that. So that is one thing to kind of consider.
Someone's got some Yeast 1318 that's 2 months overdue. Always do a starter. That way you know what you're putting into your beer. Like, make sure your yeast is active and healthy.
Yeah, I'm sure there's still some viability there. You can build it up.
Yeah, we will never say don't do a starter, but if you do a starter, you'll be absolutely A-okay.
Perfect. Oh, all right. People are still asking questions, but we better wrap this up because it is getting time for us to open up here. So thank you all for tuning in. Once again, please like this video so that we can keep doing these live streams, keep producing more videos for you guys.
I see 140 of you. You got to like it. Also, go watch our Will It Beer number 5 video that we just published. We think it's a great video. We did a lot of work on it, and so we want people to watch it. So if you haven't watched that already, watch it, and then go share it with your friends. Tell them to watch it. Make it big so we can do more. There's a lot of production that goes into the Will It Beers, and so we want to make sure that they get out there.
And the Will It Beers are fun. They're full of fun little tidbits of information, especially if you want to brew with crickets, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Because you never know. All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. We always appreciate your comments. We We love having the conversation with everyone out there. We love learning from you, especially like that bag trick. I'm definitely going to try that one of these days. And we will see you next week on Genus Brewing.